Steam just passed its billionth account. Epic seems to have quite a problem with expansion into emerging markets. Anthem seems to be somewhat dying, with player matchmaking becoming a bit more of a problem as of late, and far more all in today's episode of The Roundup. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Roundup, the twice per week gaming news show where I keep you up to date with all of the big news in the gaming industry. And there's a lot to cover with today's episode, so let's just get right into it. So, Steam have crossed the 1 billion account threshold. Yeah, 1 billion. Now, this all comes from Steam ID Finder, which picked up on the creation of an account with one of its IDs being 1 billion. Now, based off how the Steam ID 3 field works, that's like a sequential account number, and it's the billionth Steam account. Of course, though, that's accounts. That's not users. Steam has had a very long time to grow. Many people have Smurf accounts, plus there are a lot of services, and there's also a lot of bots that do make up a not insignificant percentage of overall accounts. But still, it's a hell of a lot, and that is with their monthly active users surging, with them reporting 90 million MAUs 6 months ago, up 67 million from the previous year. Now, what's particularly interesting is that a lot of this growth has came from Asia. Now, as TechRaptor reports, this Asian thing's really important. Why? Payment processing. So this actually ties into Epic. Epic Games charge their customers extra for many of the non-standard payment methods that fall outside of the big five that make up most of the Western market. Well, for Steam China, 87.5% of payments are from non-standard providers. Steam eats any additional charges within their 30% base cut, and well, for many of those, Epic will actually pass the extra cost onto the customer. And this gives Steam a massive leg up in the Chinese market, somewhere where it's already been doing fantastically, especially as of late. Now, I think what's interesting about this is that Tencent, also, Tencent run WeGame in China, that's their gaming platform, they own 40% of Epic, and they recently have launched WeGame X into the West, which is essentially an early access version of their WeGame platform localized for the West, and actually featuring games from studios like Larian. So it's a bit of a strange thing for Epic, really. They're clearly willing to give up profitability for growth, so I've really got to wonder why they don't launch, or why they're just not in a more competitive state for the Asian market. They're probably working on that sort of thing right now. I know the regional pricing and payment processors have been a massive problem for that store, especially in emerging markets, and right now it just does seem like Steam kind of has the leg up for emerging markets, which is extremely major given especially the increase in the size of the Chinese middle class over the last decade and how that is projected into the future. Next, we have some more Epic game news. So the War Z game. A pretty darn late movie tie-in. It essentially seems to be a third-person Left 4 Dead, both a zombie horde mechanic that's a bit more reminiscent of the visuals from the movie and the descriptions from the book. It looks like the type of game that wouldn't do amazingly critically, but would be quite playable and be quite fun with friends and have a strong enough fantasy to it. I think an experiential fantasy, not really a narrative one, and that seems to be the case. The game's done really well, and it's done tremendously well on the PC platform, according to its developers, who have actually attributed much of that to the Epic Games Store. So they've shifted 250,000 copies of the game at Epic's juicy 88-12 split. This has outperformed expectations, especially outside the USA, but they unfortunately did not offer further clarification over why they felt the Epic Store was a part of their success. I mean, it could just be that the Epic Store had that big Fortnite audience and they were really drawn to the game. Maybe that massive install base and massive daily active users combined with the Epic Games Store being smaller, with each game being a lot more prominent on the store, just leading to the game getting more exposure than it would have had on Steam. I mean, it's hard to tell exactly. It's hard to tell if it would have sold more on Steam. I mean, I probably imagine it would have sold better if it was on both platforms, but I suppose one thing is clear: the Epic Games Store was not a death blow to this game on PC. I have to wonder if that Fortnite audience just is making up for a large percentage of that game's sales. Of course, it's a multiplayer game, and really if that Fortnite audience falls outside the YouTube game news watching demographic, perhaps being more streaming focused. For example, with my analytics, I know that most of this channel channel's audience is between 24 and 35, with the amount of people under that age actually being pretty darn tiny. So I've got to wonder if, yes, that sort of thing is like the Epic Games Store is particularly viewed negatively with this channel's audience and the maybe slightly older, more core PC gaming audience, but if this new Fortnite crowd, who is more in the 13 to 17-year-old demographic, is just, doesn't really care about the Epic Games Store, sees a zombie game they can play with their Fortnite squad and then jumps into it, it could then, I suppose, mean that the Epic Games Store is the sort of thing that would do like disproportionately well for cooperative games that really target that type of player, and maybe that's why the War Z did so well in Epic. It's hard to know, though. Certainly Borderlands will probably appeal to that audience as well. But there's clearly seems to be a disconnect, in my view, between that core PC gaming audience who's really engaged with the news cycle, and clearly a lot of people who just don't talk that much but use the Epic Games Store a lot and seem to certainly be turning up for games like this. Anyhow, moving on, we have a quick note on Activision's role on Sekiro. So, it's fairly interesting. FromSoft had complete creative control on the game, saying that they had final say on everything past the start screen. According to an interview with the game's community manager, the core of what Activision brought to the table was user testing and QA, that kind of thing, that more traditional publisher backbone, something which traditionally I think has been a bit more important with the typical Western development process. From essentially said they didn't have the clout to publish outside of Asia, so of course they shipped the game around to publishers, including Activision, who they ended up going forward with the project with. The game originally started off being part of their Tenchu franchise from the past, but it grew past that while working with Activision. Overall, they seem to have said that Activision were fairly hands-off, that they provided them with funding and infrastructure while not being particularly overbearing. That's really the take that I get from it. It's certainly, I think that is something that comes across while playing with the game. It does feel like a very refined vision. When asked about the game, Activision's marketing director had this to say: "This is rounding out our portfolio in a new and interesting way, and I think we're going to take back learning from it, and then we'll see." So overall, it's too hard to take what she said and then completely run with it, but it is definitely true that Sekiro is far out of Activision's wheelhouse, at least, how it is today, and that the game has been a success. So it could be that with this, they'll begin to act more like a traditional publisher again, working with a larger number of third-party studios, studios that they don't own, on games that are past their core franchises. And I think that's vital to them doing well in the long run, because right now, a contraction in their Call of Duty business would spell disaster for them as a group. Just given how large Call of Duty is and how it really is the majority of what Activision publishing does. So I think that's very important. But next, let's move on to Anthem, because we've got further updates on the game. We recently covered how the game's roadmap was delayed, including key features like Cataclysms, a feature that really, I think, was supposed to evolve the endgame, and, well, based on their pre-launch communications, seems to have been a pillar of the intended endgame. Now, this being delayed, combined with a general lack of communications, has been very worrying for many within the Anthem community. I think many onlookers as well, especially combined with those unverified recent leaks of EA bonus cuts and potential layoffs. Well, there's been a quick update from Forbes' Paul Tassi, who has reported on matchmaking becoming increasingly difficult with the game, with matchmaking having a far higher chance of spitting you into a half-filled group, midway through a mission or a stronghold. Now, that's a big problem because the missions don't really seem to scale with player count once they're actually launched, meaning that they're extremely hard in those cases, and that's on top of the game's Grandmaster 1, 2, and 3 difficulties being absurd, with, the boss on the game's latest stronghold on GM3 taking, I believe, 30 to 40 minutes, from what I've heard and what from Paul reported, to kill based on, according to Paul, its massive health pool. Now, this is something that makes for a terrible player experience. It really, even the earlier versions of that really hurt my experience playing the game, and it really increases the risk of people just feeling like their time is wasted, which drives them away from the game, which makes the matchmaking problem worse. So, as Paul points out, really, there's very little to Anthem. There's very few game modes to actually matchmake for, and that makes these matchmaking struggles even more alarming. And that's really it. There's no point in playing the game right now. The new content of 1.1, its most recent update, was not that meaningful. The near term for the game looks terrible because of the abandonment of the roadmap, and the mid-term and long-term outlook are, well, just completely barren because BioWare hasn't really said anything about them. Really, what they need to do is say, hey everyone, we're working on an overhaul-sized endgame update targeted for Q3 or early Q4, and they just need to call it at that. They need to let the current game die, but give people a reason to come back. Right now, they're going to burn the last of their dedicated players and damage their chances of ever making the recovery they need to make. Then past that, another minor thing happened. Their community manager, Jesse Anderson, just tweeted about the state of things and communications, what he can and can't talk about, as well as a quick word on their rather infamous stream. Now, for context, Anthem players joke about the purple rain, which is where you open a chest and you just get a bunch of purples come out of the chest. Now, purples are not that good in Anthem. You want at least masterwork, and you really do want the legendaries, so it's just poking fun at the game's Diablo 3 launch-like loot system, or just loot problem, I suppose. Now, in the recent update stream, the one that showed off the new strongholds in the game, they got the purple rain. They got all their purples. Jesse said that, he almost said purple rain on the stream and laughed, but that basically they all just froze speechless that it actually happened. And it's a really awkward moment in the stream. And it's a sad situation, and it's certainly one that's tough for him to deal with, especially given just the other problems surrounding that stream. I think the main takeaway here is that he can't talk that much about the game's future because things seem to constantly be changing with it. So yes, it would be irresponsible for him to talk too early and to set expectations. I definitely do agree with that. It's really a short-term lose-lose situation for the most part, but what I think is quite clear is the game just needs that overhaul tier update. It needs something like Diablo 3's Loot 2.0 update. Perhaps the abandonment of the roadmap is a sign that that is coming. After all, let's be real, that roadmap would not have fixed the game's core issues. It does not need iteration, it needs to be rebuilt. Okay, next up we've got some Borderlands 3 stuff. So there was some leaked footage as well as a showcase of their Twitch extension, and it's not super massive. The leaked bit shows off what seems to be part of the game's integration with streams. It seems to be a part of the feature where the player gets some loot based on the streamer. Now, it's done all in-universe by Claptrap, who, as you can see, as one can hear, has been recast. Now, the feature kind of works in that the streamer will get a special type of chest that will prompt an opt-in event for viewers who own the game. Then a viewer will be selected at random, and they will get a piece of loot from the chest scaled to their level. Does this make the game better? No, I don't really think it does, but is it a fantastic marketing tool that will increase engagement with the game? Yeah, absolutely, it definitely will be. I think by tying in the stream watching experience to the game, it just deepens the connection, between the stream, so enjoying game meta content, and the actual gameplay itself, and I think that does make people more invested. I suppose it's the sort of thing that will just generally increase Borderlands-related watch time for people, which is a very important marketing metric for just how engaged people are to the IP. Past the free loot, though, their Twitch extension does seem quite fantastic, actually. It allows viewers to inspect the streamer's loadout and their skills. That's something that will hopefully cut down on the need for, just questions being spammed into chats and that sort of thing, which is definitely good. Past that, though, from the leaked bit of footage, people noticed a radiation damage type, a fire speed toggle for DAL weapons, a new UI, and just other features like that, including scaling that seem to work like the pre-sequel, not Borderlands 2. We're, of course, going to see more details, though, with the official stream tomorrow, so I don't think there's much more to really read into that. We're just going to get a bunch more tomorrow, so it's not really worth going into. But overall, really, the game just looks like more Borderlands for me. A larger, more detailed world, new characters, new abilities, new guns, and I think that's all people want from the game. I mean, yeah, sure, no Epic Store, but hey, we've already talked about that one to death. And then next, some quickfire. So, Days Gone, the PS4 exclusive, has managed to sell super well in spite of, I think, more average than expected reviews. Then a developer snuck a Ruby coding environment into a Switch game. Now, having a coding environment on a Switch is not something Nintendo would want, so yeah, the game got pulled. Big surprise there. It's a strange situation, but not really that important. Then finally, Sega, in the face of dropping revenue, said that they will refocus on existing IP and PC ports. It really seems like instead of taking risks on new IP, they instead want to bring their old IP to new audiences on new platforms, which I think kind of makes sense given their back catalog, but in some ways is pretty disappointing. And then let's finish it off with today's Patreon Q&A. So, Chad asked about VR coverage and specifically a deep dive episode on VR. It's certainly something that I'm interested in. I have been a VR user since the Rift DK2. I currently own a Vive, Beat Saber is one of my favorite games. I'm not sure what I do for a deep dive, but there are rumors, of course, with Valve's Index launch tomorrow and, a potential Half-Life VR project. So there's a lot of VR-related news that I think we could be talking about pretty soon. So expect VR soon, but probably not a deep dive. And then next, Travis asked about my t-shirts. While I'm actually not wearing one of the infamous gray sofa-colored t-shirts today, instead I've got the sofa-colored jumper. And yeah, though, to his question, I own 7 of those shirts. I wear basically the same thing into work every day, which is just very convenient. I have a lot less questions and things to manage in the mornings, which I really like. I probably will try to shake up the colors soon, though, just so that you have a more interesting image to look at. I probably won't go with any high saturation t-shirts, though I think that'll be a little bit too visually glaring. I kind of do like my more low saturation colors. I'm looking to change that up, though. I probably won't wear anything that's IP unless it's our own IP. I'll definitely wear that, but yeah, that's the t-shirt situation. And yeah, I recommend, just having, the whole thing of just have your jeans that you can wear and a whole bunch of gray t-shirts. It really simplifies your life, and I like it quite a bit. But that probably is just because I'm a bit strange. Anyway, there you go. That is the gaming news roundup. Look, I am aware that things have been a little bit sparse over the on the channel over the last few days. I suppose I've just had some stuff to sort out in the old real life realm that has really taken away from writing. That's very unfortunate. I do not want that to continue into the future. I don't think it will. I think most of that stuff is sort of solved. And then on top of that, I have a trip early next week that I cannot talk about. So there's been a bit of prep for that, but we should be a lot more back on the schedule super soon. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I'll see you next time.